Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'll be demonstrating the fourth and final part of our Spring Cellar Sweater. Again, you'll find this pattern on mooglyblog.com along with all the other parts. It's all finished now. To make this sweater, I used a USI 5.5 millimeter crochet hook and Bernat Softee Cotton. Let's go ahead and add our sleeves and finish our sweater. And now we're ready to start part 4 of our Spring Cellar Sweater. In part 3, we added our ribbed hem and our ribbed neckline after we finished up our seaming. So all that's left is our sleeves. Now, I have designed this with long sleeves that taper a bit before the cuff. They also taper quite a bit right here. However, I have had requests about making this into a vest. If you would prefer to go straight to turning this into a vest, then you can use basically the same ribbing pattern that we used for the hem and the neckline and go ahead and join somewhere around the middle of the armpit, essentially the underarm area, and go ahead and work that right around the arm opening to turn this into your own beautiful vest. If you'd like short sleeves, you can start the long sleeves and stop when you've got the length you'd like. We're going to be demonstrating the full long sleeves for our video. So remember, we're going to want to make two, but they're exactly the same. We make them right around the arm openings of our sweater. Then, when we get to the bottom, we can add a beautiful matching ribbed cuff. Let's get started. So since our sleeves are identical, it doesn't matter which sleeve you do first. I just went ahead and grabbed this one. So you can see I've got my arm opening right here. And if we look closely, you can see we've got rows down here, the top of a row here. There's our seam. This is our underarm or armpit area. And of course, we've got our side seam right there in the middle of it. So if we look at our instructions where we're going to join to make our long sleeves is right between the first and second double crochet after the side seam. So what does that mean? Let's look again. Here is our seam, and it might be hard to see, but you can probably feel it on your own. It feels a little different. We've got two double crochets here that were seamed right together. So we want to join right in this space between this first one and the second one of this side. Can you see why? If you've been making the rest of the fabric of this sweater, you know we work between those V's. So right there, right after that seam, is the natural place to join. So if you'd like, you can go ahead and mark that with a stitch marker while you get your yarn ready. Once we've got our yarn end, we're going to join with a standing double crochet. If you prefer, you can join with a slip stitch and then chain 3, or join with a slip stitch and work your stacked double crochets or stacked single crochets, whatever double crochet substitute you prefer. Again, this is going to be right in the middle of the armpit. Nobody's going to see it anyway, so whichever method is your favorite works. To make my standing double crochet, I'm going to start by dropping a loop on my hook. You can also start with a slip knot if that's easier. Then I yarn over, insert my hook right in that space we're going to, right between those two stitches. Yarn over and pull up a loop. I'm going to take a moment to make sure all the loops are right next to each other here at the beginning of the hook. Then yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2. You'll notice I held on to that tail end right up until I got to the end. Now, this is the new first stitch of this round, so I can go ahead and move that stitch marker right on up. There we go. I want to point out too that I'm joining here from the right side of the sweater. We're right side out right now. So, right next to the seam, we have made our first standing double crochet. So then we are going to skip our next 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next. Sounds familiar, right? Right between those 2 pairs. So there's 1 and 2. Now we go back to our instructions. We are going to double crochet in the side of the next row. And I should point out this is where we start our repeat. So it's asterisk, double crochet in the side of the next row. So as you can see, if you look closely, we've worked between those 2 stitches, but now we're coming up the side, actually the back of our sweater. So we're going to work 1 double crochet right in the side of this row. Just like when we were working into the sides of the rows before when we were doing our neckline or sewing our pieces together, we can split that stitch and just make a double crochet like so. Then, continuing our repeat, we work 2 double crochets in the side of the next row. So, come to the side of the next row and turn it and look at it if you need another look. So there's the stitch at the side of this row, and we're going to work 2 double crochets in this row. Just want to take our time there. 1 and 2, like so. Now we are going to work that repeat all the way around the round opening, or around the arm opening, until we get back down here where we're working into stitches rather than into the sides of rows. So let's work a little bit of that repeat here together. I'm going to straighten it out so we can see just these armhole rows here. So we've got 1, then 2, and that's our repeat. So we find the next row would be right there. We've got 2 stitches on the end of that row. We're going to work 1 stitch into the end, right into the side of that stitch. Then we go to the next row, and we're going to work 2 stitches in the side of this stitch. So 1, and then 2. And that's our repeat. Let's do it again. 1 stitch in the side of the next row. Make sure we try and get 2 loops if you can. There we go. And 2 stitches in the side of the next row. Trying to aim sort of for the middle of the stitch as best you can. Even with the ones where we're putting 2 in the side, normally I would split those out and put sort of 2 in the top bottom half, 1 in the bottom half of the stitch, and then 1 in the top half of the stitch. But because we're making V's in this stitch, I'm going to go ahead, and when I make 2 in the side of the row, I'll put them in the same spot so that they mimic the same look of the V's in the rest of our fabric. So as I say, continue that around until we get back down to where we're working into stitches. Okay, so now I have crocheted in the side of all the arm opening rows. You can see right there is the seam. We skipped right over that. We don't crochet into the seam. We work all the way around until we come back to where we'd be working into stitches. We've worked into the sides of all the rows. Now we've got the stitches back down here at the underarm or the armpit. So now what we're going to do, straighten ourselves out here so we're all prepared. We want to look at our stitches down here. So what we want to do is skip the next stitch and double crochet between the previous and the next stitch. So we work 2 double crochets in the side of this row. We can see now we come down here. We've got a stitch right there. We've got an opening between these stitches and these stitches. That's where we want to put our hook. So we'll yarn over and go right in there for a double crochet. Like so. Then you're going to skip the next 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next. Right back into pattern, right? You can see right where we're going to go with those. Like so. Then, if we come back and look at our work, it might look like we've got a lot of space there, but we really don't. That's just sort of the fabric pulling. Let's straighten that out so we can get a good look. The next spot is actually back here. This is the seam. We've made it back to the seam, and there's that first stitch of the round. So to finish up round 1, we are going to slip stitch in that first stitch, like so. There we go. And with that, we have finished round 1 of the sleeves. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to add 1 more stitch marker before we begin round 2. I like to have lots of stitch markers when I'm working in the round, and in particular, when I'm working in turned rounds, which is how we are going to work these sleeves. That means that rather than staying on the right side of our fabric and just working around and around, we're going to turn and actually work our even numbered rows from the inside of the sleeve. Now, again, if you've crocheted anything in the round, a long tube like this, it doesn't mean we'd have to get down in there. We're just crocheting from this aspect. What this is going to do is it's going to keep a really straight seam where we do our joining, and that will keep that seam right underneath our arm all that length. So we don't get that twisting look that can happen when you crochet in the round all from one side. So to begin round 2, we are going to start with our chainless starting double crochet, or again, you can use whatever double crochet substitute you like. And I bet you can tell we're going to go right there in that spot we are. We want 2 double crochets right there in total. Actually, excuse me, we want just the 1 double crochet. We're doing it a little differently here as we change our stitch counts to reduce the size of this sleeve opening just a little bit. So, chainless starting double crochet or whatever double crochet substitute you prefer. Again, chain 3 is fine. Right in that first spot, right where we were joined. Now, this is the new first stitch of our round, so I'm going to move this stitch marker up to the top of this stitch, like so. Now we can begin our repeat, and this row is a little different. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets in the next stitch. So, you remember in the previous round, we were going, our repeat was 1, 2, 1, 2. From this direction, it's going to look like 2, 1, 2, 1. Now we're going to be working, rather than in between stitches, for just this round, we're going to be working in the top of those lonely double crochets, the one that are here all by themselves. So we want to put 2 double crochets right in the top of that double crochet, the one that's by itself. Then we skip the next 2 and do the same thing again. 2 double crochets in the top of that lonely double crochet. So we'll continue that all the way around, and I'll see you right as we get close to the end with 3 stitches left. So here I am at the end of round 2 of our sleeve. So I've been working, you can see, from the inside of our sleeve, and I've put 2 double crochets in the top of each one of our lonely double crochets. So that has brought me right here to the end. And this is another reason I love having those stitch markers. Tells me right where I am. There are 3 stitches left, 1, 2, and 3. And that third one would be really easy to miss if I hadn't put that stitch marker in there. So to finish up this round, what we're going to do is skip these next 2 double crochets, double crochet between the previous and the last stitch. So we're going back to working between stitches for this last stitch right there on the other side of that pair, like so. And then we're going to join with a slip stitch to the first stitch of the round. So we know that this is our last stitch. So now is when we want to move that last stitch marker up. That tail end wants to be in the way. Let's move that to the inside of our sweater. There we go. So I would like to move that right now before I make that slip stitch so that I don't get mixed up later on what's the slip stitch and what is a stitch. So now I can insert my hook right in the top of that double crochet substitute, chain 3, whatever you used. Oop, there we go. For some reason that got really big. Let's do that again. Put that in there, get my yarn over there. There we go. Now we've got a nice tight slip stitch, and we have finished round 2. Remember, we always want to turn when we're making our sleeve rows or rounds when we set up for round 3. And now we're ready for round 3 of our sleeve. You'll notice I'm back on the right side of the sweater again. I've turned my work. So to begin this round, we're going to skip the first stitch, which is this one with a stitch marker in it, and work our chainless starting double crochet or double crochet substitute and another double crochet between that stitch and this pair of stitches right here. So to do that, let's go ahead and move that stitch marker out of the way since we know where we're going now. And I'm going to pull up my loop for my chainless starting double crochet, secure it, yarn over, and go right in that space, right there. We want to make sure to skip that first stitch between the first stitch and the pair of stitches right there. There we go. If you put it in the wrong spot, again, great thing about crochet, you can pull it out and put it in the right spot. There we go. So let's double check. Yes, we are between what was the first stitch of the previous round there and that pair right there. So we've put our double crochet substitute right there. We'll put another double crochet in that same space, like so. And now we begin our repeat. Skip the next 2 stitches and work 2 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. Should sound familiar. Skip 2, work 2 double crochets right in between. 1 and 2. Skip 2 and do it again. And for this round, we're going to continue that almost all the way around until 1 stitch remains. So I'll see you when we get to the end of round 3. Okay, so as you can see, I've worked almost all the way around round 3. We've got just 1 stitch remaining right there, our marked stitch. To complete this one, we're going to go ahead and skip over that and join to the first one. And you can see how that brings us back to our usual stitch repeat for this pattern. So since we know now this was our last stitch, I'm going to go ahead and move the stitch marker up again. There we go. And now I can slip stitch to the first stitch of this round. And that will finish round 3. Now, round 4, which I will demonstrate here in a moment, is the same round we're going to repeat for the full length of our sleeve. So for the number of rounds you need for your sleeve length, be sure to check the written instructions. It's also always a good idea to try your sleeve on. Try it on as you're crocheting. If you're making a sweater for yourself, it's a great opportunity to really make a custom sleeve length. There are standard sleeve lengths for everybody, right? They're all averages, but everybody's arms are actually a different length. So as long as you're custom making a sweater, try it on. Add, subtract rows, whatever you need to make it the perfect sleeve length for you. And just make sure you take a note so you can do the same thing on the other sleeve and you don't end up with 2 sleeves of different lengths. So let's go ahead here and start round 4 together. And again, like I say, this is going to be the same round we'll do for the rest of the length of our sleeve until we get to the cuff. But you do want to turn, so every other round will be from the outside of the sweater. Round 4 itself is on the inside of the sweater. We're going to start by making our chainless starting double crochet and another double crochet between the first and last stitches of the previous round. So that is right where our hook lies right now, right between those previous and last stitches. So we just pull up our loop. Again, this is my favorite double crochet substitute. You can use whichever you prefer. Chain 3 is always a viable substitute. And especially for this use where, like I say, that line's going to stay right underneath the arm, that'll work really well. There we go. So we've got our double crochet in there, however you like to make it, followed by a quote-unquote real double crochet. There we go. And after that, we're just back to our stitch pattern, the same one we were doing before. Of course, now we're working in the round rather than in rows. We skip 2 stitches and 2 double crochets right in between. Skip 2 stitches, 2 double crochets right in between those pairs, just like we were doing before. As you come around, you can see you're going to work your last pair of double crochets in there, skip over these 2, and then join to the first one. So for rounds 4 through, well, like I say, depending on the length of your sleeve, it's going to be anywhere from 36 to 30, which sounds weird, but it's the way the shoulders work on this pattern. For those number of rows, again, just work in this same stitch pattern, our main stitch pattern. You're not going to change your stitch count, and make sure to turn so that you work every other round from the inside or the outside of the sweater. So here you can see I have crocheted all the rows for my sleeve, and I'm ready to do my cuff. So if you are trying this on to get a custom sleeve length, so it's just right for you, be sure to leave about 2.5 inches or so for the cuff at the end of your sleeve. Now, if you've gone short sleeves or 3/4 length sleeves, you may want to skip the setup row of the cuff. The setup row is going to pull it in a lot more so that we get kind of that bell-shaped sleeve and we have a gather there at the cuff. For a shorter sleeve, of course, you aren't going to want as tight a gather as you would have on the wrist. So you would skip the setup round and go straight to the cuff instructions, which are going to be very similar, well, basically the exact same what we did there on the hem. If you are doing the full length sleeve and you don't want a straight sleeve, you want it to come in as shown in the pattern, then we have a setup row and then we'll go back and forth for our cuff. So now we're ready to begin our cuff with our setup round. I'm back on the right side of the fabric, the outside of the sleeve. So for our setup round, we're going to start with a chainless starting double crochet between the first and last stitches of the previous round. Love having my stitch markers there to help guide me. So there we go. I will make my chainless starting double crochet. Of course, again, you can make whatever double crochet substitute you like. And I'm going to move that first, get that out of the way there, move that first stitch marker up here into the top of our new first stitch of this round. Should we get under both of those top 2 loops? Just makes it so much easier when I'm coming back around for the next round or row. In this case, it'll be rows. All right. So we've got our double crochet between our first and last stitch of the previous round, kind of right in that space where we were. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and then we begin our repeat that begins with the asterisk. 2 double crochets between the previous and the next stitch. So by now, hopefully, you've got a real good idea of where those 2 stitches go. Maintaining that stitch pattern. There we go. So we put our 2 stitches right there. Then we're going to skip the next 2 stitches and double crochet between the previous and next stitch. So just 1 double crochet between the next 2 sets of stitches here. And that is our repeat that takes us around. Similar to what we did at the top of the shoulder to bring that armhole down a little bit for our sleeve size, we want to do the same thing now to bring it down for our cuff. So our repeat, we go to the next space here, we skip 2, we go right between those posts for 2 double crochets. So there's 1 and 2. There we go. Pull up a little bit more yarn from my skein. There we go. And then skip the next 2, 1 double crochet in the next space. Let's do that one more time now that I've got some yarn pulled up. Skip 2, 2 double crochets, 1 and 2, skip 2, and 1 double crochet. So that will be our repeat all the way around. When we come all the way around, we'll join with a slip stitch in that first stitch. There we go, that first double crochet right there. And then we will not turn before we begin our cuff rows. As you can see, I've worked all the way around my sleeve opening for my setup round. So at this point, I can go ahead and move that last stitch marker up to the top of this stitch. There we go. Make sure that's good and closed. And then I will finish up with my slip stitch. I always like to move the stitch marker before the slip stitch so I don't get confused. There we go. And like so, we have finished our setup round. Now, previously in our sleeves, of course, we'd turn each row and work from the inside of the sleeve, for each round, I should say. But now we are done working in rounds. We are going to switch to rows, and it's going to be just like the bottom hem that we put on our sweater before. So let's go ahead and get that started together. We're going to start, of course, with our chain of 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Then we are going to single crochet in the top 2 loops of the second chain from the hook. So we go back down, find that second chain from our hook. The first one will be our turning chain there. And carefully pull that up. There we go. Now, if you'd like, you can go ahead and grab another stitch marker. I always like to have one in here. Put that right in the top of that single crochet right there. And then, just as before, we're going to go back to working in the back loop only. So we want to work single crochets in the back loop only of each remaining chain across. There we go. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right down there, right back by the end of our sleeve. There we go. So we should have a total of 8 stitches for row 1. Oh, but I almost forgot. There's 1 stitch left at the end of row 1. It's not a single crochet, but we need to go back to our slip stitch 2 togethers. So I'm going to go ahead and move that stitch marker out of the way. That is the stitch we joined to, and that's that first row comes out of there. So we want to come to the next stitch and pull up a loop, and then go to the stitch after that, and then pull up a loop and pull that loop through the other 2 loops. And now, officially, row 1 is done, although the stitch count is still 8 single crochets. So now we're ready for row 2. And row 2, again, just like we did when we made the hem and the neckline. We're going to turn, we're going to skip the slip stitch 2 together, and then back loop only single crochet until 1 stitch remains. So there should be 7 back loop only single crochets. That's 2, 3, 4. Of course, I've run out of yarn again. Let me pull up a little bit more here from my skein. There we go. And so that was, let's see, that would be 4 of them. So we've got 5, 6, 7. And that brings us to our last stitch with our stitch marker. And we want to go under both of those top 2 loops for a single crochet, just as before. So our repeat, just like when we make the hem, is going to be rows 2, which we just made, and row 3. So let's work row 3 together now. We're going to turn again, since we're making rows here. And now, since we're at the end away from our cuff, we do need to chain 1, and then we can single crochet under those top 2 loops of the first stitch. And now we can move our stitch marker up again. There we go. And now we go back to working our back loop only single crochets until we've worked back down to the cuff. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and remember that 7th one likes to hide sometimes. Just kind of get your hook in there best you can. There we go. There's 7. So now we've got our total of 8 stitches again, and we can't forget to attach it to the end of our sleeve. So we can see we worked into that stitch right there. We can see it pulling up. We know this is the next unworked stitch, so we're going to pull up a loop through that stitch, pull up a loop from the next stitch, pull that loop through the other 2. And now we're all set up to continue working all the way around for our cuff. When we get to the end, we'll sew them together just the exact same way we did when we made our hem. If you'll recall, we did that part in, I believe it was part 3. Yes, part 3. I had to stop and think for a second. We just worked back and forth in rows all the way around the hem until we got to the end and whip stitched that last row to the bottom of the first row. And that's exactly what we do for our cuffs. Of course, when you've finished one sleeve, you get to start over and do it all again on the other side. And that's how to crochet the Spring Cellar Sweater. I hope you've enjoyed this pattern, and I hope you'll check out the rest of the patterns and tutorials on mooglyblog.com. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.